Toni Sharpless disappeared after driving away from an argument in the middle of the night in August 2009. Her car was briefly seen in the following weeks, but never fully tracked down and caught up with. Toni herself hasn't been seen again, or so we think. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe, and if you're old here, hello again. My name is Kate Philpott and I cover true crime and missing person cases on my channel. Real quick, just want to say thank you for all the really nice comments on my last video. I wasn't expecting people to be so nice, about all of that, so I really appreciate it. And this is like, you make my heart happy. By the way, I have a bit of a new setup, so I'm hoping it's looking a little bit more professional, but I am now using a teleprompter. So I'm really just getting used to this because this is so different to how I normally film videos. Today we're going to be talking about a missing person case that has baffled experts since 2009. There are a number of very strong theories, things that very well could have happened to Toni, but she still has never been found. So grab a drink and let's get into it. This is the case of Toni Sharpless. Toni Sharpless was born on the 27th of December 1979 in Pennsylvania. This made her 29 at the time of her disappearance. Her mother, Donna, unfortunately her husband, Toni's father, died in some sort of accident when Toni was only 6 years old. So Donna did remarry and she married a guy called Peter Neville. Peter then stepped in as a stepdad and pretty much raised Toni and her sister Candy as his own. Toni herself then had a daughter quite young, in her late teens, but she didn't let that faze her. She never questioned whether or not to keep the baby. It was more just, okay, we're doing this and I'm going to be the best mother ever. She then put herself through nursing school, she got her degree, she got a job in Lancaster General Hospital, so she was definitely making moves in her life. But also over those years, she started really struggling with her mental health, unfortunately. But these issues went undiagnosed for quite a while. Toni would just be crying for days at a time, and eventually she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which was just honestly a massive relief, because at least now she knew, like, she had an awareness of what was actually wrong, and they could start getting things into place to fix the problem so that it wouldn't affect her any longer, because it was very disruptive in her life. You know, she would go into manic episodes and just constantly be talking and not stopping and not sleeping for days at a time, and then would be catapulted the total opposite direction into a depressive episode, and it was very difficult for her to function properly. And Toni did start to self-medicate with substances and alcohol, and after a while with struggling with that, she checked herself into rehab. So it was tough. Luckily, she had a friend called Crystal who offered to drive her there, and Toni at this point was in such a bad way that she didn't even look like herself. So she spent 21 days in this rehab facility, and when she came out, it was like a rebirth. She was renewed, she was refreshed, she was on this new combination of medications which was working great. And she wasn't the most religious at taking them, but she did her best, like everybody does with these kind of things. And the only thing with this medication was that it wouldn't be ideal to drink alcohol while taking them. So this was for a few reasons. It could be simply because it deemed them ineffective, but it could also have significant effects on a person's behavior, a person's emotions, and maybe even cause them to get into honestly life-threatening situations. But for months after this, things were going absolutely great. She didn't drink on these meds, she was working hard, she was actually working nights as well, and she was just getting herself nicely set up in life. But stories on this channel, unfortunately, are never positive forever. So that leads us to August 2009, when Toni disappeared. On the 22nd of August, Toni had just come off a night shift in the morning, and what she would normally do was stay up for the whole day and then go to sleep at night to reset her whole sleep schedule. You know, the kind of thing you do if you were jet lagged or if you arrived home from a massive trip in the morning, that kind of thing. So she spent some time with her daughter and her sister Candy, and then Toni, Candy and Toni's friend Crystal went shopping later that day. Crystal being the friend that had previously dropped her to rehab that time. So they were out and about, they're having a girls' day, and Crystal gets a text. And it was from her friend Matt Green. And Matt Green was inviting her to go out that night because he was in town, his cousin was in town. His cousin was actually Willie Green, who's a professional basketball player in the NBA. At the time, he was playing for the 76ers. So the girls kind of thought, oh, that's exciting. Like, let's do it. Now, Candy wasn't able to actually go, but it was just Crystal and Toni. But here's the thing. This was definitely going to be an alcohol-based evening. And with Toni's medication, you know, it's not really an ideal situation here. And Crystal apparently had absolutely no idea about Toni's meds and the effect that alcohol could have on them. So if you ask me, it was a bit of a recipe for disaster. But listen, hindsight is a wonderful thing. So that night around 9:30 p.m, Toni left her house with Crystal and they went to downtown Philadelphia, and they went in Toni's 2002 black Pontiac Grand Prix sedan. Bit of a mouthful. So Toni's stepdad Peter had thought that it was actually a little bit weird how this all kind of panned out. He saw it as Crystal kind of pushing Toni into this night out, and because most Saturday nights for Toni were all about family time, all about spending time with her daughter, having worked nights all week, he just thought it was kind of strange. And Peter and Donna didn't really trust Crystal in general because she also had a criminal record for harassment charges back in, I believe, 2005. And also, Toni and Crystal had been friends over 10 years prior, and soon after Toni had her daughter, they lost contact, and it's not exactly clear as to whether they had some falling out for some reason or if they just drifted apart, but they had just recently reconnected. And now this was happening. I don't know, Peter and Donna just had a weird feeling about it before it even happened. So the night went as follows. The girls went to a couple of different bars and then on to a nightclub in Philly. And because they were with this famous basketball player in the NBA, they got into the VIP lounge. So you can imagine, like, they're having a great time. They're hanging out with celebrities. Like, they're having drinks, they're having fun. But that's the thing. They're having drinks and they're mixing drinks, and nobody was any the wiser about Toni drinking. So from here, they go to an after party, which was, I suppose, more like an after gathering in Willie Green's house. You know, you're never gonna have like hundreds of people at an after party. I mean, I don't know. And with all this alcohol in a bunch of people, sometimes things start to go a little sideways. I'm sure we've all either experienced or at the very least witnessed this. So there ends up being some kind of misunderstanding in that someone accused Toni of using a racial slur, and apparently it was Willie himself who was offended by it, and Toni started getting very, very defensive because, you know, obviously she didn't mean it in that way, but it just went beyond defending herself. Toni saw red. She was screaming at people, she was breaking things, she even smashed a bottle of champagne right on the floor. It got totally out of hand, and I'd also imagine that champagne was pretty expensive considering they were in Willie Green's house. I don't know, but you know, and either way, things get a little crazy. And Crystal noticed even that Toni's pupils were totally dilated, so when she tried to calm her down, like, she just couldn't. There was no bringing Toni back down to a manageable level. And obviously, we know this is absolutely to do with Toni's medication mixing with all this alcohol, but still nobody that was there had any idea. So naturally, Crystal and Toni were kicked out, but remember, they had driven there. So, now what? Toni was definitely not safe enough to drive, and Crystal knew that, and Crystal knew that she probably wasn't either, but she was the safer of the two to drive, so she took the keys, but Toni was not having it. Toni grabbed the keys off Crystal and insisted on driving. Again, not ideal. A lot of people in this situation would refuse to get in the car with someone who's in such a state, but Crystal was adamant that she wanted to make sure Toni got home okay, so the two of them left together. But that was not the end of the drama. They only drove a few hundred feet and Toni slammed on the brakes. She started shouting at Crystal because she thought Crystal was mocking her and laughing at her like everybody at the party. And now I'm sure what actually happened here was probably just something as simple as Crystal saying to Toni, like when she got her alone, just saying like, God, what the hell was that in there? But whatever it was, Toni was fuming and kicked her out of the car. So Toni drives off, and although Crystal thought Toni would come back for her or something, she did not. And another thing that's very important to be aware of here, the tank was less than a quarter full. I've seen it said that whatever distance they had to drive, that would not have been enough to get her all the way home without refilling. And let's be honest, she was in an area that she wasn't familiar with anyway. And apparently, according to Toni's parents, she wasn't really that good with direction anyway. So this is all pretty concerning, considering Toni never made it home. Back to Crystal, she's left stranded there, and Toni doesn't seem to be coming back. So she tries calling her. No surprise, Toni's phone is off and she can't get through. Crystal calls Candy then, Toni's sister, to let her know like what had happened, but she also couldn't get through to Candy. Candy only got the calls the following morning, so everything is just delayed those few hours. When Candy finds out what happened, she gets in contact with their parents just to make sure that Toni actually did get home, because Toni was living with her parents at the time. But then she finds out Toni didn't make it home, and nobody knew where she was. So there are so many things that could have happened here. It could be, we know it could be a simple explanation, but it could be something not so simple. So they were thinking maybe she got a DUI or something, so they contacted the local jails. Nothing. They thought maybe she got into an accident, so they contacted the local hospitals. Again, nothing. Or what if she did run out of gas somewhere and hadn't managed to make it home yet? What if her phone died and she was stuck somewhere? I mean, they tried calling her, they continued to try calling her, but there was still no response and there was no answer. And with regards to the timeline, Toni drove off from Crystal sometime between 4:30 a.m. and 5 a.m, so it was pretty late. And not only was it late, you've got to remember the night before, Toni was working all night. And who knows what time she actually woke up before that night shift. So she had stayed up all day after that night shift, and then all night again on this night out. And whatever way they worked it out, they figured she had been awake for at least 36 hours, which is insane. And in the past, her staying up for days at a time would often send her into a depressive episode. So did she drive off and do something to herself? You know, she was in a particularly poor mental state when she left the party. And actually, she did have a history of attempts of taking her own life. This was more something that the police thought was an option, but her family really didn't. I mean, it would take a lot for any mother to leave her young daughter behind, especially without the father in the picture. I mean, I'm not sure what those details were, but that's the conclusion I've come to, having not seen anything about the father and not seen anything about her having a partner or anything like that. So it didn't take long for Toni to be reported missing. And they gained access to Toni's phone records. And the last text Toni sent was at 2:57 a.m. to her daughter, because her daughter wasn't able to sleep and Toni was comforting her and saying she'd be home soon, which is very unsettling to hear. And then her last phone ping was at 4:53 a.m, which is estimated to be around the time she left the party. Now, they also put out her license plate number to all of the local police departments, so that with their technology of having license plate readers, it would be able to ping and turn on all kinds of alarms within a police car if Toni's car drove past them or if they came across it in some way. But there were no hits initially. But I'll get to that in a sec, because there's a few other things you need to know first. They also gained access to Toni's bank accounts, and there was no movement there. So with regards to the overall investigation, they started to try and figure out what way Toni would have gone, or could have gone even. Because from where she was, there was only one way to get onto the highway, but that would lead you eastbound, and Toni needed to go westbound. So she would have to go well out of her way to turn around and head back towards her home. The only other road she could have mistaken for an exit actually led pretty much straight to a boat ramp, and this boat ramp led to a river which was like 25 feet deep, which is pretty worrying. And you know how when you look at water at night and there are no lights around to reflect on it, like, she could have easily seen that and thought it was a road, thought it was something she could drive on. Look, I don't know. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. So a bunch of voluntary organisations in the area searched this river with sonar equipment and they got some hits. They actually came across 3 cars at the bottom of this river. Madness. And see, before this, the authorities weren't sure if it would be worth the huge expensive time and money that it would have been to search this river properly, so that's why it was voluntary organizations. But this was definitely the evidence they needed to say, yeah, it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. So with the police's even more advanced search equipment, they found even more cars down there. So I was already shocked at 3. There were 11 cars down there. So this was going to be a huge deal of a search. You know, you're not only bringing up 3 now, you're trying to bring up 11. Now, for some reason, they could only bring up 9 of these cars when they were properly searching, but none of them were Toni's. So that was a little surprising, honestly, but this whole thing ended up being a dead end. But that wasn't the only tip regarding Toni's car. And this is the part I'm sure you've all been waiting for. On the 8th of September, just 2 weeks after Toni disappeared, there was a hit on a local police department's license plate reader, and it pinged as Toni's car. And this was the police department in Camden, New Jersey, which is just across the river from downtown Philly and about 20 minutes away from where Toni actually disappeared from. Basically, right, Toni's car drove past this police car. There were big warning, alarms, alerts, and all this going on inside the police car. But unfortunately, there was nobody in the police car at the time. Not great. So anyone could have been driving that car. It could have been Toni, but it also could have been literally anybody else. It doesn't give us a lot of clues, but it's a little weird that her car is just moving around. Also, gotta say, Camden, New Jersey, not a great reputation. It seems to be known as fairly dodgy, known for a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, a lot of forced sex work. Now, things started really moving along in this case when a private investigator called Eileen Law took on the case. And she felt very strongly about the case in general, and she felt very strongly about the possibility that Toni was still alive somewhere. For Eileen, the number one priority was to get Toni's face and name everywhere, all over the media at first. Naturally, this brought in a lot of tips and actually quite a lot of sightings, particularly at the beginning from Lancaster, which is actually where Toni worked. There were so many calls about a woman who matched Toni's description, who seemed distressed, and a good few of the sightings put this woman with a man who wasn't particularly gentle with her. But then something strange happened. After about a week, the calls stopped. And about a week after that, they started again. But now, the sightings were mainly based in Philly. Then they stopped again, and later on, more came in primarily from Camden, New Jersey. So look, this is all a little weird, and there was a major theory that this woman was actually Toni. The theory that she'd been taken by some man and was being moved around to different locations. And actually around this time, there was a man who was arrested in the area for kidnapping women at, bus stops, gas stations, things like that. Quiet places, really, and forcing them into sex work. And I can't help but hear alarm bells in my own head about Toni being really low on gas. I don't know. I honestly think that fact is significant. She easily could have gone to a gas station and been approached by him, or even just anybody else with less than ideal intentions. I mean, she may have even needed to rely on the kindness of a stranger if she didn't have any cash on her, or there's a lot that could have gone wrong just because she was low on gas. Now, another major part of this whole investigation into Toni's disappearance was a handwritten anonymous letter. Now, this letter claimed to have information on Toni's disappearance, or at the very least on Toni's car. Allegedly, they tried to give this information to the police in Philadelphia, but it wasn't in their jurisdiction, so this person who wrote the letter was given the PI's contact info. Their claims were they'd been contacted by a friend near the end of September 2009 about a car that was owned by someone who was missing. They were offered $5,000 in cash to take this Grand Prix that matched the description of Toni's car to a shop in Boston. They were asked if they knew anyone in their late 20s who wanted to paper trip, which I had no idea what this meant at the beginning, but that basically means an attempt to create a new identity, and the person was offered a social security card to give to the person that would be willing to do this. So whoever wrote this letter took the job. Right, they took the job and they brought the car to Boston the following day, and they then took the license plates and cleared out the glove compartment. Now, in the glove compartment, they found what they believe to be Toni's phone. Again, could be very significant here. Also, before leaving the car, they wrote down its VIN number, vehicle identification number, I think. And now possibly the biggest claim of all in this letter was that the writer's friend's friend, okay, we're off to a hot start, but the writer's friend's friend was a police officer in Camden, New Jersey. He got into some kind of altercation with a girl, which resulted in her dying, and then they needed to get the car out of there. Now, I'm sure you're probably thinking this all sounds like a whole bunch of bullshit. So was I. But there are one or two small pieces of information that the writer of this letter provided that kind of changed my mind a little bit, and I'm still not sure what to think about it. First of all, they provided the car's license plate number, which matched Toni's. But what I will say, this had been widely publicized when Toni first went missing, so it didn't really prove much. But there was more. They also provided the last 5 digits of the car's VIN, which also matched Toni's. And they provided Toni's phone number, down to every last digit. And those last two, the VIN and the phone number, they weren't publicized at all. And they were spot on. Do with that what you will. Eileen Law, the private investigator, actually felt that there was some weight to this because she'd also received an email that corroborated some of it as well. Oh, yeah, I'm really not sure what I think about it. I would love to know your opinions so far. Authorities, on the other hand, think that this letter is a prank of some sort. But then, it's not the most ridiculous thing to assume that there could be something to this. I mean, if we think about the state Toni was in when she was last seen, I mean, both physically and mentally, she was drunk, she was very argumentative, and of course, the authorities don't want people to think that this is the truth. Because if it is, that would expose a whole police cover-up. I mean, do with that what you will. Alright, now let's get into the theories. There are quite a few people that are still suspicious of Crystal, believe it or not. I mean, she was the last one to see Toni alive. She knew about the previous mental health issues. I mean, she literally drove Toni to rehab. So why wouldn't she know about the whole medication thing? About, you know, if Toni mixes alcohol with her medication, some bad stuff could go down. Like, why didn't she know about that? Now listen, maybe she just didn't. I don't know, but there's a whole lot of debate about Crystal. And I mean, it was easy for her to portray herself as the victim of Toni's outburst, particularly in the car, because, you know, Toni can't exactly come out and explain her side of the story. And at the end of a night of drinking, it's very easy to get angry. And if somebody goes off on you, it is 10 times as easy to get angry. So I'm just thinking about Crystal having Toni just exploding at her. It's not impossible for her to get totally enraged herself. You know, and if that was the case, was there some kind of accident? Look, I don't know. Her harassment charges in 2005 make her a little less pristine, I guess, too. But nobody's perfect, so I don't know. Toni's friends do say that she would never ever leave another woman on a dark street in Philadelphia where she didn't know where she was, and, you know, in the middle of nowhere, basically, because that's another thing too. Like, it's bred into us as women to make sure that we all get home safe. So did Crystal think of Toni getting home safe, but then Toni didn't think of Crystal getting home safe? I mean, you could just put that down to the state she was in, but I suppose, I don't know, something like that would probably differ person to person. What I will say is Crystal has passed a lie detector test, I believe maybe even multiple. Eileen Law believes her story, and she interviewed her as well. Like, literally showed up to Crystal's house unannounced, and Crystal didn't kick her off her property. Like, she answered all her questions for over 3 hours, and Eileen used some questions that were specifically designed to pick up on deceptive behavior, and she didn't think anything sketchy was going on with Crystal. So yeah, I mean, it looks pretty unlikely that there was anything sketchy there. Maybe she's not being 100% honest. That's kind of what my gut is telling me. But I don't think it's because she's actually guilty of anything. I think it's more just it would make her look more guilty. So she's holding back on some minor details, which is something people do as well. So I don't know, it's a whole thing. It's a whole confusing thing. Let me know what you think about that. Lower Merion police have cleared Crystal of any involvement, and her phone records confirm her attempt to call Toni around the time that she said she did as well. Now, the next theory is that Toni was kidnapped and is still alive. I mean, there's a strong possibility also that on that night, Toni had some kind of encounter with a stranger who kidnapped her and forced her into sex work. She was vulnerable. She wasn't fully there within herself. It would explain all of the different sightings at the beginning, and a woman matching Toni's description being moved around to different locations, you know, obviously to try and hide her, and also being seen with a man who was kind of rough with her, shoving her and, you know, stuff like that. Something also to do with this theory, there was a sighting in 2011, 2 years after Toni went missing, where a woman described a dancer in a Midwestern city, and she gave specific descriptions about the woman that she described as fairly similar to Toni. And she also described specific body piercings and specific stretch marks that Toni actually had. And there are some people who think this theory just doesn't make sense because she was a little older than the woman that they would typically target. You know, most would be in their late teens, early 20s. And Toni was 29 when she went missing. And there is a potential of a further aspect of this theory that might be, okay, yeah, like maybe this is what happened. She was tracked, but she was such a high profile missing person so soon that it was way too much work to keep her hidden. So who knows what they would have done with her in that case. Toni's mother, Donna, believes Toni is no longer alive. However, she is still looking into this theory that actually Toni was taken and is still alive somewhere. Now, the next theory is about kind of random foul play / crime of opportunity. So there is the possibility that this was just a random attack. Toni had alcohol in her system that was mixing with her meds. Maybe she went to get gas, maybe she was stumbling around and fumbling with her keys, and it was dark. You know, someone like that is just so vulnerable to anybody, and there's nobody around at that hour. And maybe it's possible that she had another outburst at somebody and that got her into more trouble. She was pissed when she left that party. Pissed off. Well, pissed, yes, but pissed off. And whether random or not, someone got rid of her car in some way or another, which does make me think that there was some kind of foul play involved here. Like, they would have found her car by now. Another theory then is based off that letter I told you about, where a police officer pulled her in. There was an altercation that ended up ending Toni's life. But this whole theory has been highly, highly debated over the years. I mean, some people think this is absolutely must have been what happened. Others think there is no way. I must say, I do find it very interesting that the police are like, nah, it's just a prank. Of course you're gonna say that, which makes me more suspicious of them. They're saying that even though the letter provided accurate numbers and details and stuff. I don't know, that's just the one thing that gets me. And let's be honest, the police officers probably know how to get rid of evidence much better than the average person. I'm just saying, I don't know, but I would genuinely love to know your opinion on the theory that that letter presents. It is very interesting to me. And look, there are a bunch of other theories too that I'm just going to briefly kind of breeze over, and I'll mention them, but I'm not going to go into detail because I don't know. I just think the other ones I've spoken about are a lot more likely. But again, you let me know what you think. First of all, we have that Toni took her own life because she'd had previous suicide ideations, but neither she nor her car have been found, which I find very unlikely for that theory. There is a theory that Toni ran away, but why drunkenly run away? And why leave your daughter? I mean, even if in your drunken state you decided to run away, wouldn't you likely come home like late the next day even? Like, surely you would become sober, get back to your regular normal functioning state and be like, oh my god, what was I thinking? I'm just gonna go home. So I don't know. Then of course there is a theory of the car accident. I mean, she was definitely driving under the influence. But I mean, how could her car not be found? Was it in a ditch somewhere? She wouldn't have been able to get very far because she didn't have enough gas to get very far. So surely somebody would have come across it within a few kilometers of where Willie Green's house was. Speaking of Willie Green, there is a theory that he was involved because of that issue at the party, and he thought she'd said a racial slur and everybody'd had a lot to drink. But over the years, he has been more than willing to cooperate, and he has actually been cleared. Then, kind of similar to that, is that something got out of hand at the party and everybody there is covering it up. Or even just a small portion of the people covering it up, and it happened in a room away from the rest of the people. Look, I don't know. Willie Green's house was never actually searched, which I find interesting, but I feel like someone over the years would have blabbed. That's just too much guilt for too many people. Like, there's no way. But those are all the theories I have for you today, guys. Listen, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and comment down below what your thoughts are. I usually have an opinion when I cover a case. I'm really torn on this one. I honestly feel like there is still a possibility of her still being out there in a really bad situation. I also think that maybe there is some weight to the letter that person wrote. And then there's also weight to maybe it was just a crime of opportunity. Like, I honestly, I just don't know. I always have opinions. Like, this is weird. Anyway, I want to know what you think. I'm assuming yous will probably say certain things that will help me make up my mind, because you usually do have really, really good points. So let's have a chat down below. Listen, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for being here as always. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload of mine. And I'll see you in 2 weeks for the next one. Bye guys.